The original concept of multiple intelligences was coined by Howard Gardner, a Harvard professor of psychology, in 1983. Gardner noticed that people who had suffered brain injuries were still capable of performing at high levels in specific areas. He coined these areas as abilities and defined them under 8 different umbrellas: logical, mathematical, linguistic, musical. In other words, the 8 multiple intelligences. Rather than think of students as intelligent because they can do their multiplication tables, for instance, Gardner suggests that students are gifted in different areas. A student experiencing memory difficulties may do well with a hands-on activity. The theory of multiple intelligences was largely adopted by teachers in the 1980s, after Gardner published his book, Multiple Intelligences. Teachers saw an opportunity to bring creativity in the classroom, to look at lessons from 8 different angles rather than one. Recently, the works of Thomas Armstrong have provided digestible and concrete examples of MI lesson planning. Multiple intelligences in the classroom guides teachers through the process of lesson planning from 8 different angles. Furthermore, Armstrong touches on the possibility of eliminating learning disabilities by understanding that all students have individual needs. Over the last 2 decades, multiple intelligences have become a mainstream pedagogy in the educational field. They've opened our mind to the prospect that students aren't one-dimensional learners. They aren't good in one subject and poor in another. Rather, all students can succeed in math if they're given the right outlet. MI creates a framework for students as individual learners. It encourages teachers to work with the students, modeling real-world learning.
Okay, so after that introduction, this article is about Howard Gardner, and he talks about technology. Of course, this article was written in 2000, so I like this article because it gives an insight to Howard Gardner as he was talking about technology before technology became something very big. So let's apply multiple intelligences, Howard Gardner's method, to technology. It says people in technology. So remember this, just keep in mind that this article was written in 2000. People in technology, it's a love-hate relationship. Those who long for the simpler days of old blame societal ills on a variety of technological advances. Trainers also have a love-hate relationship with technology. They blame it for shoddy instruction, low course completion, and the mindless adoption of e-learning just because it's currently the hot way to teach. Nevertheless, technology and learning through the use of technology is here to stay. Just listen to educator Howard Gardner. And it talks about how, it gives his introduction. He's from Harvard, and it has this picture here that did not make a good scan, but here comes the article. Gardner says that one major task before embracing any new technology is to determine the educational goals and demonstrate how that particular technology can help achieve them. Well, that makes sense. So let's look at what are we going to teach, and can technology help do that? In Gardner's view, the same events that stimulated the development of the computer also brought about a revolution in our understanding of teaching, learning, and the way the human mind functions. His ideas refer to the transition over the past 4 decades from the behaviorist theory of psychology that the way people learn is through the series of sequential reinforcements to the theories generated by cognitive scientists who use computers to help them stimulate and understand the way the brain works to solve problems. Here's his quote. Instead of focusing on actions and reactions, as the behaviorists did, cognitive scientists argue about the nature of human mental representation, said Gardner. What is the stuff that we think in? How many forms of representation do we have? How does one learn, remember, understand, and create? According to Gardner, viewing the brain as solely an information processing entity comparable to a computer gives an incomplete picture. And in his book, Frames of Mind, he questions the information processing psychologies, saying they have the blithe notion that a single, highly general problem-solving mechanism can be brought to bear willy-nilly. Gardner adds, to my mind, the excessively mechanist, computer-driven model for thinking and the Pinche for scientifically oriented test problems foreshadow certain long-term problems. In other words, the human mind is far more than just an information processing machine, which is true. The human mind has emotions, it has ways we want to learn, so let's continue on. And he says, each of us has a mind that is unique in this construct as well as the content. The human brain has an internal structure that is continuously updates and alters as new information is received. And everyone has a different way to handle the information they receive and processes. It's people's individual strengths and weaknesses that Gardner is talking about when he proposes these separate intelligence that all humans have: linguistic, logical, spatial, musical, vitally, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalistic, which is his multiple intelligences. So he's trying to say that the brain is different and processes differently for everyone. So scroll down, that's what he says. Gardner observes that new technologies make the materials vivid, easy to access, and fun to play with. Technology readily addresses the multiple ways of knowing the humans demonstrate. See, technology in 2000, Howard Gardner is saying that technology makes it where we can learn more and makes things more fun. He says electronic media will become increasingly person-friendly and will adjust to the needs and desires of learners. I don't believe, however, that disciplinary thinking can be wholly assumed by electronic media because much knowledge is tactic and implicit and counter our own intuitions. That's true. We cannot just learn all solely on a computer. But he is making a good point that as we progress, learning will become easier and technology is going to actually help us better. Thus, the challenge to live instructors and creators of electronic education is to figure out what is the best achieved by a person teaching face-to-face in the classroom and what can be best achieved through distance learning. There's always going to be your tear between distance and face-to-face. Gardner concludes, clearly a marriage of education and technology will be a happy marriage. Only if those charged with education remain clear on what they want to achieve and vigilant that the technology serves those ends. We have seen this on many fronts with the online universities. The online universities have set their goal of making a lot of money. So they put a product in that may not be very good. But if a university says we're going to do online courses that are going to be stimulating and not really driven towards profit, then they can actually have a good education. So that's what Howard Gardner continues to say, before you bring in technology, you need to say, what are my goals for technology and how can I hit the multiple intelligences? This next video I'm going to show you is an interview with Howard Gardner. Hope you enjoy.
We have schools because we hope that someday when children have left schools that they will still be able to use what it is that they've learned. And there is now a massive amount of evidence from all realms of science that unless individuals take a very active role in what it is that they're studying, unless they learn to ask questions, to do things hands-on, to essentially recreate things in their own mind and then transform them as is needed, the ideas just disappear. The student may have a good grade on the exam. We may think that he or she is learning, but a year or two later, there's nothing left. If, on the other hand, somebody has carried out an experiment himself or herself, analyzed the data, made a prediction and saw whether it came out correctly, if somebody is doing history and actually does some interviewing himself or herself, oral histories, then reads the documents, listens to it, go back and asks further questions, writes up a paper, that's the kind of thing that's going to adhere, where if you simply memorize a bunch of names and a bunch of facts and even a bunch of definitions, there's nothing to hold on to. The idea of multiple intelligences comes out of psychology. It's a theory that was developed to document the fact that human beings have very different kinds of intellectual strengths, and that these strengths are very, very important in how kids learn, and how people represent things in their minds, and then how people use them in order to show what it is that they've understood. If we all had exactly the same kind of mind and there was only one kind of intelligence, then we could teach everybody the same thing in the same way and assess them in the same way, and that would be fair. But once we realize that people have very different kinds of minds, different kinds of strengths, some people are good in thinking spatially, some people are good in thinking language, other people are very logical, other people need to do hands-on, they need to actually explore actively and to try things out. Once we realize that, then an education which treats everybody the same way is actually the most unfair education, because it picks out one kind of mind, which I call the law professor mind, somebody who's very linguistic and logical, and says, if you think like that, great. If you don't think like that, there's no room in the train for you. If we know that one child has a very spatial or visual spatial way of learning, another child has a very hands-on way of learning, a third child likes to ask deep philosophical questions, a fourth child likes stories. We don't have to talk very fast as a teacher. We can actually provide software, we can provide materials, we can provide resources which present material to a child in a way in which the child will find interesting and will be able to use his or her intelligences productively, and to the extent that the technology is interactive, the child will actually be able to show his or her understanding in a way that's comfortable to the child. We have this myth that the only way to learn something is read it in a textbook or hear a lecture on it, and the only way to show that we've understood something is to take a short answer test or maybe occasionally with an essay question thrown in. But that's nonsense. Everything can be taught in more than one way, and anything that's understood can be shown in more than one way. I don't believe because there are 8 intelligences we have to teach things 8 ways. I think that's silly. But we always ought to be asking ourselves, are we reaching every child? And if not, are there other ways in which we can do it? I think that we teach way too many subjects and we cover way too much material, and the end result is that students have a very superficial knowledge, as we often say, a mile wide and an inch deep, and then once they leave school, almost everything's been forgotten. And I think that school needs to change to have a few priorities and to really go into those priorities very deeply. So let's take the area of science. I actually don't care if a child studies physics or biology or geology or astronomy before he goes to college. There's plenty of time to do that kind of detailed work. I think what's really important is to begin to learn to think scientifically, to understand what a hypothesis is, how to test it out and see whether it's working or not. If it's not working, how to revise your theory about things. That takes time. There's no way you can present that in a week or indeed even in a month. You have to learn about it from doing many different kinds of experiments, seeing when the results are like what you predicted, seeing when they're different, and so on. But if you really focus on science in that kind of way, by the time you go to college, or if you don't go to college, by the time you go to workplace, you'll know the difference between a statement which is simply a matter of opinion or prejudice and one for which there's solid evidence. The most important thing about assessment is knowing what it is that you should be able to do. And the best way for me to think about it is a child learning a sport or a child learning an art form. Because there it's completely unmysterious what you have to be a quarterback or a figure skater or a violin player. You see it, you try it out, you're coached, you know when you're getting better, you know how you're doing compared to other kids. In school, assessment is mystifying. Nobody knows what's going to be on the test, and when the test results go back, neither the teacher nor the student knows what to do. So what I favor is highlighting for kids from the day they walk into school, what are the performances and what are the exhibitions for which they're going to be accountable. Let's get real. Let's look at the kinds of things that we really value in the world. Let's be as explicit as we can. Let's provide feedback to kids from as early as possible, and then let them internalize the feedback so they themselves can say what's going well, what's not going so well. I'm a writer, and initially I had to have a lot of feedback from editors, including a lot of rejections. But over time, I learned what was important. I learned to edit myself, and now the feedback from editors is much less necessary. And I think anybody as an adult knows that as you get to be more expert in things, you don't have to do so much external critiquing. You can do what we call self-assessment. And in school, assessment shouldn't be something that's done to you. It should be something where you are the most active agent. I think for there to be long-standing change in American education that is widespread rather than just on the margins, first of all, people have to see examples of places which are like their own places where the new kind of education really works, where students are learning deeply, where they can exhibit their knowledge publicly, and where everybody who looks at the kids says, that's the kind of kids I want to have. So we need to have enough good examples. Second of all, we need to have the individuals who are involved in education, primarily teachers and administrators, believe in this, really want to do it, and get the kind of help that they need in order to be able to switch, so to speak, from a teacher-centered, let's stuff it into the kid's mind kind of education to one where the preparation is behind the scenes and the child himself or herself is at the center of learning. Third of all, I think we need to have assessment schemes which really convince everybody that this kind of education is working. It does no good to have child-centered learning and then have the same old multiple choice tests which were used 50 or 100 years ago. Finally, I think there has to be a political commitment which says that this is kind of education which we want to have in our country and maybe outside this country for the foreseeable future. And as long as people are busy bashing teachers or saying that if we can't try anything new because it might fail, then reform will be stifled as it has been in the past.
For more information on what works in public education, go to edutopia.org.
Okay, so that's Howard Gardner, and you got to see an interview with him. He still works at Harvard University, and he's very smart, and he writes a lot of books, and people write a lot of books about him, and it's very impressive. Now we need to shift gears to motivation and what motivates students. So I'm going to show you an article, which it should be on your screen now, but it talks about motivation. And this article, I found it, and I thought, man, this is a really good article. It talks about motivation of college students and what they like from their teachers. And it has a little quick review of LIT that we'll look into, but then it gets into some results I thought was kind of amazing. And then I'm going to show you a video on motivation theory, which is a psychological theory for motivation. So let's just go through this article, real quickly, and just let me show you what I thought was very cool. But the article is called Millennial Perspectives and Priorities. It's 2015, a very new article. And let me just go through. Let me hit some of the key points that I've highlighted. Clearly, many college students are academically adrift and have been for some time. Today, student opinions on teaching and learning, while gathered, are not typically valued or considered to the point of making significant changes in curriculum or instruction. What that is referring to is every semester students do evaluations of their courses. And those, for the most part, are just returned to the teacher, and I'm assuming many teachers do not even read theirs. So that's why they're saying that there's not many significant changes. Professors are not really encouraged. They're really not encouraged to have new teaching styles. They're just told to teach the material and do research. So, students really need that good impact of teaching, that different kind. So let's look at this. Typically, administrators do not know whether a teacher reads or employs their student evaluation scores for making improvements. And that is true as well. Another challenge is that faculty members are generally unaware of what a particular group of students prefer reading regarding delivery of instruction. So many faculty members, they'll teach a group of students, and then it's just the next semester. And it's sad to say, but for the most part, faculty members are not really motivated to understand what their students need. I'm not bragging, but obviously I see a lot of students on their cell phones. So I was going to do Blackboard and Blackboard Connect and items such as that, and I realized that really wasn't user-friendly. And I also realized that a lot of my students want to watch YouTube videos. So I just started putting my videos on YouTube. It's just like, this is so much easier. You have to be aware of what your students want as well. So look at this. By exploring what students prefer, faculty may better understand how to direct their teaching efforts, thus reducing inefficient or ineffective directions, methods, or investments of time and energy. So find out what the students want, and then you can change from there. Teaching is ultimately difficult because it is meant to evoke a substantial strides in student learning outcomes. So it is difficult. Of course, teaching is difficult. Now, they go into a small literature review, and I thought that was kind of important. Some of it kind of goes into a different angle, but some of it's pretty good. Specific evidence related into how teaching impacts student learning appears to be vital. The single most dominating factor affecting student academic gain is teacher effect, and that goes into our previous lessons. If a student is to do well, so look at that, academic gain, teacher effect is important. How effective is the teacher? Students may not be motivated to learn when faculty deliver course content in a low-key, matter-of-fact way, devoid of overt acts of caring. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's what one researcher said. Yes, we've always heard that the professor just stands there. He's so boring. When a professor is boring, research says that the students are not interested in that. If caring is key to students' motivation to learn, he offers that it's also important. Look at this. A teacher's motive energy flows towards the student view an act of caring. A recognition that an act of caring has transpired. So when a student cares about what they're teaching, when a teacher cares about what they're teaching, then the students can view that and they can see that, and they actually want to be part of that. It also says modeling, which we know what that is where we do not merely tell the students to care, but we also allow them to see that we care. So caring is a key element to that. Motivating students to learn may transpire in a variety of ways. Teachers can motivate their learners to care by transforming and conveying content in the form of a story. Yes, that's why people love history professors. History professors, first off, care, and secondly, they tell stories. And you go, wow, this professor really cares about the Vietnam War. And then he tells a very compelling story, so it wraps you in there. That's why I also, once again, talking about myself, whenever I teach any kind of education course to undergrad students, I'm always talking about stories, war stories we call them, stories from the school when I go observe student teachers. And they're like, oh, okay, because to me, a story makes it more personable and also makes it show that I care. Positive energy presented may also be inspiring and motivational for students. Positive energy. Now, this next part of the article talks about the method of how they were going to research this study. They surveyed a bunch of you don't have to read it. They surveyed a bunch of students in a college. They asked them some questions and asked them how they wanted to be taught. So there's the whole point of it. Now, what they found out was, and here's their findings. Look at this. When asked about preferred active learning strategies, almost 60% reported that they liked hands-on, labs, or experimental activities, such as field-based observations, going out to the real world and learning things. When asked about engagement, 76, or 3 out of every 4 students, preferred that their learning be related to the real world. Teach me what I'm going to need to know. I taught social foundations. And when I taught social foundations, I taught about salary. And I've just started to bring that into all my classes now when I teach salary at schools. And I also started teaching about retirement. And people are like, this is real. I need to know this. So real world interactive stories does help people. When asked about their engagement strategies, students rated highly their preference for teacher timeliness. Do the teachers turn in homework on time? Do they see, it's always important to them. It's difficult to turn. It's difficult as an educator to grade things on time and get them back to you. But that, according to this, students love it, 66%. 4 out of 5 students, 80%, indicate that instructors' enthusiasm was a major factor for gaining their attention for learning. 80%. 80% said if the teacher was happy, then that did. Look at this, top preferred strategies. Provide notes, projects, quizzes, and exams are all related. Syllabus includes a detailed course schedule. Students love a schedule. Hands-on interactive labs, class discussions, case studies. They hated learning through completing community service projects. No one wants to go out to the real world. Self-assessments, they hate those. Policies are discussed clearly like that. Real-world connections are made, and class environment is stimulating. Timely feedback on quizzes, 66%. Enthusiasm from your instructor, and also look at this, short lecture. Let's not do an hour-and-a-half set. Let's do a short lecture. I actually have found that when I teach a class for multiple hours, if I put in a lot of quick breaks and if I also bring in videos, it makes it flow faster and students like that. But I've also found, on a side note, when I do videos such as this, students actually enjoy them more because they make them as short as long as they want them to. They can watch them on their phone, they can watch them on an iPad or a tablet, and they can say, okay, I'm going to pause it now. I'm tired of hearing Ratliff talk, and I'm going to take a break. Short lectures make people actually enjoy their lessons better. I just thought this is a really good article, and you can kind of tell from my motivation. It's actually a really good article because it shows us the inside of what college students are saying, and it goes away from the evaluation models that no one ever sees. This is where students are saying, hey, I need a short lecture, I need a professor who turns homework in time, I need a professor who's happy with what they're teaching, and I need real-world connections. Okay, now this next video is a video from someone else who did a better job than me, and it's going to be about motivational theory. I borrowed it from someone. So just check it out, and we'll watch about this is the actual psychological part of motivational theory.
You probably heard this story. Aaron Ralston was out climbing in Utah's Blue John Canyon when a giant rock shifted under his feet and he fell, pinning his right arm to the canyon wall. He was stuck. And worse, he hadn't told anyone where he was going. For the next 5 days, Ralston tried to move and chip away at the rock. He ate his remaining food, drank the last of his water. Eventually, he drank his own urine and started videotaping his goodbyes. But then something happened. Ralston had a dream. He saw himself as a father picking up his son, and with that vision, an overpowering will to survive kicked in. He broke his arm bones, sawed through his flesh with a dull pocket knife, and freed himself. Ralston harnessed some of our most powerful psychological forces: hunger, thirst, desire to be part of a family, need to return to the human community. They ignited his tenacity, which allowed him to do an incredible thing. He harnessed the power of motivation, obviously in a big, big way. In its most basic sense, motivation is the need or desire to do something, whether that need is biological, social, or emotional, and whether that something is making dinner, going to college, or cutting off your arm. Motivation is what gets you moving. But the big question is, why? Why do we do anything? I mean, why ever bother changing out of my sweatpants? Psychologists often view motivation in one or more of 4 ways. On their own, none of these theories is perfect, but taken together they help us understand what drives us. Let's start with the first theory, an evolutionary perspective. For a while, in the early 20th century, it was popular to think of all behaviors as instincts, or innate drives to act a certain way. But this so-called instinct theory was misguided, in part because the presence of a tendency doesn't always mean it's supposed to be there. Like, we can imagine why a bunch of people might start rioting at a heated soccer match, but to say that they're supposed to, a little short-sighted. Evolution is a far more complex, chaotic, and interesting process than that. Plenty of behaviors could just be accidents of evolution. Late paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould called these accidents spandrels, or traits that rather than being adaptive, just stuck around as byproducts of other processes. Today, we define instincts as complex, unlearned behaviors that have a fixed pattern throughout a species. For example, dogs instinctively shake their fur when wet, salmon return to the stream in which they hatched, and human babies know how to suckle just minutes after being born. These are true genetically predisposed instincts that do not require learning. But today we understand that while certain tendencies may be genetic, individual experience plays a major role in behavior and motivation as well. So another theory of motivation suggests that a psychological need or drive simply compels us to reduce that need. This is called the drive reduction theory. This could be as simple as hearing my stomach growl and looking for a burrito. My need is food, my drive is hunger, my drive reduction behavior is burrito. Drive reduction is all about maintaining your body's homeostasis, the balance of its physiological systems. As much as we're pushed to reduce our drives, we're also pulled along by incentives, the positive or negative stimuli that either entice or repel us. The mouth-watering smell of that burrito pulls me toward it just as much as my hunger pushes me there. However, we're also clearly more complicated than our homeostatic systems, and drive reduction theory may oversimplify a lot of our behavior. For example, a person may fast for days, ignoring their body's hunger to honor some spiritual or political cause, and I know I'm not the only one who sometimes eats when I'm not actually hungry. So a third theory, the theory of optimal arousal, attempts to fill in some of those gaps. It suggests, rather than just reducing a drive or tension like hunger, we're motivated to maintain a balance between stimulation and relaxation. Say you're holed up in your house all weekend studying, you're bored and lonely and getting weird, so you call up some friends to go mountain biking or go to a karaoke bar or whatever you like to do for stimulation. The idea here is that you want to hit the right level of arousal, which, take note, psychologists often use in a non-sexual sense, without getting overstimulated and stressed. So if you nearly break your face on that bike ride or the journey covers at karaoke night start getting too dense, you may need to back off and take a nap. Of course, everyone has a different level of optimal arousal, and I'm guessing Aron Ralston's was fairly high. Adrenaline junkies may jump out of planes to hit their ideal level, whereas others might be satiated by an engaging book or a new knitting pattern. No matter which, the optimal arousal theory suggests that we're motivated to avoid both boredom and stress. And obviously, not all needs are created equally. If I'm suffocating and can't catch a breath, I'm not going to be thinking about eating that burrito, and if I'm about to be ravaged by lions, I'm not going to be worrying about my next paycheck. American psychologist Abraham Maslow illustrated this shuffling of priorities in the mid-1900s with his famous hierarchy of needs. Down at the bottom of the pyramid, you'll find our most basic physiological needs for food, water, air, and moderate temperatures. The next rung up speaks to our need for safety, then comes love and belonging, followed by esteem or respect. And finally, once all those needs have been met, we have the relative luxury of being motivated by self-actualization and spiritual growth and yoga retreats and stuff. Of course, there are problems with Maslow's vision. Empirical research hasn't really supported his hierarchy. We tend to skip around on that pyramid all the time, and the importance of those higher level needs may vary depending on our culture and finances and personalities. But still, everyone is restricted by the lowest levels of the pyramid, so regardless of theories about why we have them, most schools of psychological thought agree that we are driven by at least three big motivators: sex, hunger, and the need to belong. We'll do a whole lesson later on all sorts of sex-related stuff, including how it motivates us. There's a lot there. For now, let's just say that sexual motivation is how we promote the survival of our species through recreation and/or procreation, both of which help human communities bond and expand. Without it, none of us would be here today, thinking about burritos and severed arms and sex and stuff. Internally, we are biologically driven to knock boots by our sex hormones. We're also motivated by psychological and socio-cultural influences ranging from suggestive external stimuli plastered all over billboards, magazines, and TVs in the form of, like scantily clad bodies sprawled out on beaches, to more genteel desires like love and family or adherence to personal, religious, and cultural values. Sex is a big motivator, but it isn't precisely a need. No matter what anyone has told you, people do not die without it. Hunger, though. After air and water, food is our body's greatest need, and thus obtaining food is one of our greatest motivations. Hunger may seem pretty simple: eat food, stay alive, but physiologically and psychologically there is a lot going on, and like so many things, it starts in the brain. The sensation of hunger usually begins with a drop in your blood sugar level. Glucose is our body's primary source of energy, and while you might not initially feel a drop, your brain will. Your hypothalamus monitors your blood chemistry and responds to both high levels of the hunger hormone ghrelin and low levels of glucose by triggering that feeling of hunger, reminding you to eat something. I am in fact experiencing it right now. Once you've eaten that burrito, your metabolism takes over, converting that food into energy. But while our physiological need for calories varies depending on our body size and composition, your gender, and your age, our hunger is also shaped by our psychology, culture, and mood. And these factors don't just rule when we're hungry, they also guide what we're hungry for. Biologically speaking, most humans and many other animals have a genetic taste for sweets and fatty foods because they're typically high in energy, but other taste preferences are conditioned through experience and culture. I may have an aversion to oysters because they once made me sick, and love gingerbread cookies because my grandma used to make them. Although popular in Cambodia, I'm not too keen on eating fried tarantulas, just as lots of folks around the world think that the very idea of peanut butter is gross. Still, the feeling of hunger affects us the same. During World War II in the US, some conscientious objectors volunteered for medical research as an alternative way to serve their country. Perhaps the most famous of these studies was physiologist Ancel Keys's Minnesota hunger experiment, which measured the effects of semi-starvation by partially starving its volunteers. While ethically dubious, the experiment was geared toward understanding the many small and large effects of hunger which was plaguing Europe at the time. The study started in 1944 by feeding 36 young, healthy men a normal diet for 3 months, then halving their caloric intake for 6 months, then slowly rehabilitating them to normal weight during the last 3 months. They ate mostly wartime foods like root vegetables, bread, and pastas, and were required to walk 22 miles and participate in various work and educational activities for 40 hours each week. The goal was to see a 25% drop in body weight during the starvation period. And as you can imagine, the changes were dramatic. The men became gaunt and listless and showed a decrease in strength, heart rate, and body temperature. But the psychological effects were perhaps even more dramatic. The men became totally obsessed with food. They dreamed about it, talked about it all the time, read cookbooks. They lost interest in sex and jokes and social activities. They were irritable, anxious, and depressed. In the end, they were all rehabilitated, but the study gave us some understanding of the devastating psychological effects of starvation. It also showed us something of the social effects as men withdrew from one another and isolated themselves. As one fundamental need was frustrated, these men experienced the decline of another, the need to belong. Humans are social animals. Evolutionarily speaking, it's fair to say that social bonding has helped us survive. It's a tough world out there, and we've got a lot better shot at thriving if we're sharing resources and responsibilities, protecting and supporting each other in groups. That isn't to say you need to be joined at the hip with everyone. Our social needs have to be balanced with our autonomy, our sense of personal control, so we feel both connected and independent. But sometimes we're denied that sense of belonging. We've all experienced the pain of being ignored or rejected at some point in our lives. It's worse than just about anything. The evidence for this is abundant. One recent study suggested that teenagers who had a sense of belonging to their community had better health and emotional outcomes than those who didn't feel like they belonged. Cultures all over the world use ostracism or social exclusion as a type of punishment. Whether it's kids in timeout, adults in exile, or prisoners in solitary confinement, separation feels like a punch in the gut. Never underestimate the power behind what motivates us. The need to survive, the need to belong. If you can harness that motivation, you can do just about anything. Just ask Aaron Ralston. If you were motivated to learn today, hopefully you took in 4 theories of motivation, including the evolutionary perspective, drive reduction, optimal arousal, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and how sex, hunger, and the need to belong motivate us. Thanks for watching, especially to our Subbable subscribers who make this whole channel possible. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of Crash Course or even be animated into an upcoming episode, just go to Subbable.com/Crash Course. This episode was written by Kathleen Yale, edited by Blake T. Pastino, and our consultant is Dr. Ranjit Bhagwat. Our director and editor is Nicholas Jenkins. The script supervisor is Michael Aranda, who is also our sound designer, and the graphics team is Thought Cafe.